Hi everyone. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to use a shared and linked Keycloak service. I have two projects here already created, one for provisioning a shared Keycloak service and one for provisioning our linked Keycloak service. First, let's provision a shared Keycloak service. Let's select Keycloak from the service catalog. Let's click Next. Let's select the project where we want to provision Keycloak in. I'll leave the username and password as is. We can specify the realm to create the public and bearer client in. By specifying this, it will first check if the realm exists. If not, it creates it and creates the public and bearer client within it. For now, let's leave this empty. This defaults to creating a realm with the same name as our namespace and create the clients within that. Since we're creating a shared Keycloak service, we can leave the next two fields as is. Let's click Next and create our service. Let's look in our project overview. We can see that the provision has started within our project. Let's wait for this to finish. This may take a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cut the video here and come back once it's finished. Our Keycloak service has now been provisioned. A secret has been created which has the admin username and password we specified in the configuration. It also has created a config map which has details of the public and bearer client created during provision. Let's have a look at our Keycloak web console. Let's go into the administration console and sign in as the admin user. We can see the shared KC realm here, which was created during provision. If we go into clients, we can see the public and bearer client here that was created during provision. Let's try linking a Keycloak service to the service we just provisioned. Let's go back to the service catalog and select Keycloak again. Let's click Next. Let's specify the project. I'll leave the username and password as is. I'm going to leave the Keycloak realm empty here as well. This time we'll set this field to true and specify the Keycloak URL we want to connect to. Let's click Next and create our service. Let's have a look in our project overview. We can see that the provision has started. Let's wait for this to finish. This may take a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cut the video here and come back once it's finished. Now that our Keycloak service has been provisioned, we should see the secret created with the admin credentials, as well as a config map with the client details. Let's go back to our Keycloak web console. Let's refresh this page. Here we can see the linked KC realm that was created during provision. If we go into clients, we should also see the public and bearer client created during provision. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console and create a binding for our shared service. Let's click Create Binding. Let's click Next, and let's specify the service name that we want to bind to. Let's click Bind. This will start the bind process. Let's wait for this to finish. We can now see that our bind has finished. Let's have a look inside our Keycloak web console. Let's go into Clients. Here we can see the bearer client that was created during the binding. We can see that its client ID is FHSyncBearer and its name is FHSync, which was the service name we specified in their binding configuration. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console and ensure that the secret created has the right client details. We can see here that it points to the correct realm. The resource is the client ID we saw in the Keycloak web console. It has the correct name value. The client ID here is the ID of the client which is used in the client's Keycloak URL. We can also create a binding in our linked service. Let's go back into our OpenShift web console and go into our linked KC project. Let's click Create Binding. Let's click Next, and let's specify our parameters. Let's click Bind and wait for this process to finish. Now that the binding has been created, let's have a look at our Keycloak web console. An FHSyncBearer client will be created within the linked KC realm and has the correct client ID and name. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console and ensure that it has the correct client details. We can see here that it points to the correct realm, has the correct resource and name, and the client ID correctly corresponds to the ID used in the URL. Once we don't need this binding anymore, we can unbind it from the Keycloak service. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console, into our project overview, and unbind this binding. Let's wait for this process to finish. After a few minutes, we see that the binding has disappeared from the list of bindings within this service. If we look into our Keycloak web console and go to the linked KC realm, we should see that the bearer client created during the binding has been removed from the clients page. This will also work the same for unbinding bindings in our shared Keycloak service. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console and go into our shared KC project. Let's unbind this binding here and wait for this process to finish. After a few minutes, we see that the binding here has disappeared. If we look into our shared KC realm, we should see that the bearer client created during the binding has also been removed. Let's try to deprovision our linked KC service. Let's go back to our OpenShift web console, into our linked KC project. Let's select Delete in the service menu, which starts the deprovision process. Let's wait for this to finish. This may take a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cut this video here and come back once it's finished. After a few minutes, we see that our service is gone from the project overview. The secret created has been removed, as well as the config map created during the provision. If we go back into our Keycloak web console, we see here that the RAM remains available. This is in case another service is using it. Let's now try to deprovision our shared Keycloak service. Let's go back into our OpenShift web console, into our shared KC project, and deprovision our shared Keycloak service. This process may take a few minutes, so I'm going to cut this video here and come back once it's finished. After a few minutes, we see that the Keycloak service has been removed in our overview page. The secret, as well as the config maps, have also been deleted. If we go back into our Keycloak web console and refresh this, this should be inaccessible. That's it for this demo. Thank you very much for watching.